Psst. Hey, I found a video. Want to co-op on it?
I did it! I managed to get into... Wait a minute, this isn't Fox.
Fox? Nah, this is C.A.N.
Alright, say, what you got there?
A lackluster countdown made by a guy called DreamcastGuy about games that are rip-offs of other games.
Ooh, gimme!
Hang on, we found this material first!
You wanna go, mate? You want me to kick you in your can?
How about you join us in the try-up?
Sure. I hear threesomes are quite fun.
Wait, what?
Right. Let me go get my avatar. Ready?
Yeah!
Well, that intro was...
One side, fool! This kind of thing's my specialty. So, let me just start off by saying this has gotta be one of the most lazy-looking intros I've ever seen. You have the generic chiptune music that's pretty much commonplace in the countdown and review community. You also have that black void that is your background. Like, come on, dude, is it that hard to throw a background of some sort in there?
Also, the realistic image of the Dreamcast controller distracts from the aesthetic of the intro. Is it so hard to make a sprite for it that fits it better? Please don't make an excuse saying, oh, I can't sprite it, will be too much work. Google Images is a thing. Use it. For what, you may ask? A reference.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the ungodly horrendous sprite of yourself. Like, okay, you edited Small Mario's jump sprite from Super Mario Bros. But the thing is, the way you outlined it in the beginning looks so garbage. The lines are way too thin in some places and way too thick in others. If you really wanted to do this kind of effect, you could make the entire sprite white and then have that fade into a colorized version of the sprite. At least then it'd look a little more appealing. Oh, and while I'm at it, let's talk about your username, DreamcastGuy. Ignoring how you're using the blandest font in existence, it may come off as dumb to ask you this, but why are you using a Super Mario sprite in conjunction with the Sega aesthetic and imagery? I understand it's extremely nitpicky in the grand scheme of things, but intro-wise, it's pretty inconsistent with your username. It's like if for the normal Boots intro they used gloves instead of boots. It just doesn't work.
Normal gloves. I would watch that!
What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and this is Top 10 Thursday. Creativity can be difficult. Racking your brain trying to come up with the next big idea takes time and effort, and that's why some people in the art world say, if you can't craft greatness, learn to mimic a masterpiece. No place is this more obvious than in gaming. So this week, we're taking a look at the shameless copycats that cashed in on my list of the top 10 games that are total rip-offs.
Oh god, the face at the end creeps me out. DreamcastGuy is gonna kill us all!
He's talking about rip-offs when this channel as a whole is a copy-paste job of other top 10 channels. GG!
Dude, can you speak any slower? We will get back to this later.
Number 10. Fighter's History. In the 90s, Street Fighter II was the most played arcade title on the planet. Machines would literally have lines of people in front of them waiting for their chance to beat each other bloody. It was a worldwide phenomenon that raked in millions of dollars every year, which probably explains why it got such a blatant clone. You might have assumed that you've been seeing footage from Street Fighter II, but in fact, this is Fighter's History. The character models are altered just a bit, and yet it's hard not to notice all the stolen assets. I mean, seriously, they even copied the look of the health bars.
And those are sprites. The Street Fighter series did not have 3D models until Street Fighter 4. Sure, there were spin-off games, but we're talking about the main series titles.
There's a distinct difference between models and sprites. How you don't know the difference baffles me.
Number 9. Sonic Shuffle. If there is one thing everyone loves, it's sitting down and challenging each other to minigames. Titles like Fusion Frenzy, Rayman Raving Rabbids, and of course Mario Party have demonstrated this time and again. This is a subgenre that is surprisingly successful, so after Sega launched the Dreamcast, they were looking for something along these lines to fill out their library. That's when they decided to make their own, not so clever version of the dice-filled action of Mario Party. While there are some changes, including a strange RPG combat system, there's no avoiding that this is pretty much copy and paste content. The next time you try stealing an idea, maybe add in a bit more of your own style.
I find it weird how he says the game is part of a subgenre, but he still calls it a ripoff.
Yes, its gameplay is similar in that you move around a board in order to complete an objective, but there are plenty of differences that prevent it from being a blatant ripoff, as you put it. For one, stuff you yourself mentioned, like the RPG battle mechanics and the card system. In addition, there's also the fact that each board has special pathways only specific characters can take, adding another layer of strategy. And to top it all off, unlike pretty much every party game in existence, Sonic Shuffle has a story mode. Yeah, I'm not going to argue the game is bland and confusing, but it's not the blatant ripoff you make it out to be. Besides, there's at least a handful of other titles I can think of that are much closer to being ripoffs of Mario Party than Sonic Shuffle is. Crude's Prehistoric Party.
He pretty much said, "Oh, this is a ripoff because it is a game similar to Mario Party." Next!
Number 8. The Simpsons Road Rage. When it comes to originality, licensed games are basically scraping the bottom of the barrel. These projects are typically hired out to small companies willing to make a fast game for a quick buck, but this game is actually even lazier than normal. What you're seeing on the left here is Crazy Taxi, a game where you pick up passengers and run them across town for points. On the right is Simpsons Road Rage. As you can tell, they mimic the physics, the arrow at the top of the screen, and even some of the silly catchphrases. The two projects are so obviously identical that the designers ended up getting taken to court and sued for copyright infringement.
The Simpsons games are parodies of other games. Examples other than the one you're showing right now include The Simpsons Skateboarding, which is a copy of Tony Hawk, Simpsons Hit and Run, which is a copy of GTA. That's what I hear many people compare it to, so shut up. And last but not least, The Simpsons game. Guess what? Parodies. Games in general. It's kind of the point.
Number 7. Angry Birds.
Bloody what? Boy, you better have a bloody good reason why this is on your list.
Put the gun down. Think about the children.
For just a moment, try and imagine that you and a few of your closest friends have decided to make a game. You have a concept that you think is unique, you're willing to learn programming, and you're dedicated enough to make this a reality. Sadly, after you create your vision, it never really goes anywhere. That is, until someone else rips it off. That's the situation the guys behind Crush the Castle found themselves in. I think it's safe to say that the talentless hack behind Angry Birds just flat out stole this entire game. Right now, it's estimated that Angry Birds has made roughly $3 billion, all because they took somebody else's genius idea.
Shots fired.
Alright mate, not only is this quite a stretch, seeing as there's multiple different games that involve you hurling projectiles at some kind of structure, you hardly give us any of the information that you'd need for us to take this entry without an entire salt shaker at the helm. Who made the game you claim had their idea stolen by Angry Birds? Between what span of time did these games come out from each other? What was the original game even called? We shouldn't have to look up these things ourselves, especially since it's your job as the presenter to supply this information. It's just bad form on your end if you don't.
Yet again, you seem to forget to provide context.
And context is one of the key things you need for a countdown.
Number 6. Crash Team Racing. Speeding around a corner, you're barely in second place. It's the final lap and you can see the person in the lead right ahead of you. Using your power-up, you fire, hoping to knock him off the track and win a last-second victory. Sound familiar? If you grew up mastering Mario Kart, then this entry is probably no real shock. To be honest, there are a lot of kart racers that followed in the footsteps of Nintendo's classic, but this felt like the first one to really reuse the formula beat for beat. Crash Bandicoot grew his fanbase by having great platformers, but this spin-off just seemed like a random cash grab. Clearly, some lame executive in a boardroom said, "What's the top-selling game right now? Make us a Crash Bandicoot copy of that."
Ignoring how majority of kart racers have gameplay mechanics like drifting and using items to mess up your opponents, as it's pretty much commonplace in the genre, and how Crash Team Racing, in particular, was praised for doing many things better than...
The only installment of Mario Kart that could have been remotely relevant at the time of Crash Team Racing's release was Mario Kart 64. But here's the thing. Those games came out 3 years apart from each other. If you're talking about all the Crash Team Racing games, Crash Nitro Kart came out in 2003. And guess what? It bet out Mario Kart Double Dash's North American release by a week. And unlike Mario Kart, Crash Team Racing has much more of an emphasis on drifting than Mario Kart ever has.
Both games are clones, most definitely, but they are far from being rip-offs, and yes, there is a difference. Being a rip-off would imply that it's a shoddy attempt recreating the game mechanics of another game, and you see pretty much any review of either of the games, you'll find that not to be the case.
Number 4. Saints Row. Grand Theft Auto is a franchise that's always been a landmark of each console generation. Every time a new one comes out, all of gaming seems to take a giant leap forward in design. At the end of 2005, the Xbox 360 debuted, and people were eagerly awaiting the announcement of a new Rockstar game. What they got instead, though, was an eerily similar game by a different team. Saints Row was essentially a third-party GTA, complete with gang wars, fast cars, and heavy weapons. At just a glance, you could almost mistake them as being part of the same series. Thankfully, they learned that living in the shadows isn't very fun, and they took Saints Row into much more ridiculous directions. Just as a side note, if you haven't played Saints Row: Get Out of Hell, you really need to.
So this begs the question, are you talking about just the first game or the series as a whole? Because I'm gonna be honest, you're not being very specific.
Not to mention, and I can't believe I have to repeat myself, but only this time to a somewhat lesser extent, just because it takes place in a city and is a sandbox game with a plot, means that it's a GTA clone? Remember when I said that Hit and Run was a GTA clone? Yeah. Why isn't it on the list? Using your logic, that game has just as much of a reason to be on here as Saints Row.
Ugh, anyone have pain relief medication? This fucker is giving me a headache.
Ugh, same.
Number 3. Dante's Inferno. This is by far my favorite game on the list. I don't even mind that it's such a hardcore ripoff, because at least it's enjoyable. Let's follow the journey of Kratos from God of War and Dante from this game. Kratos loses his wife, swears vengeance, and fights impossible bosses and creatures from ancient mythology to get even with the gods. Dante is also a man who loses his wife, swears vengeance, and battles... Wait a second, these are the exact same game. I mean, look, they have the same art style, the same kind of enemies, and even those QuickTime events for killing big monsters. I believe this is the reason we never got a sequel to Dante's Inferno. Even though it sold decently, once God of War came out on the PlayStation 3, they realistically knew that they could never compete with that incredible game.
So what about games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta? Games that also have you face larger-than-life enemies using very complex combo systems. And let me ask you something. How exactly is realistic an art style? Because you say art style, and all I see when I look at Dante's Inferno and God of War is them both trying to be as realistic looking as possible.
And you say this game is good, which would kind of negate it being a ripoff and more so a clone. Remember what I said earlier?
This entry, like most of the others, boils down to same genre, must be a ripoff.
Number 2. The Great Gaina Sisters. One of the first direct copies to happen in the world of gaming was back in 1987. Super Mario Bros. Was burning up store shelves, and developers everywhere were rushing to get their own piece of the platforming action. A tiny company called Time Warp Productions didn't feel like coming up with an original idea of their own, so instead what they did is rebuilt Super Mario Bros. Brick by brick. What can I even say about this? We have Goombas, gems that can be collected like coins, and even small fireballs that can be shot just like a fire flower. You know what I love most about this story? They tried to act like they came up with this project completely on their own. When confronted by Nintendo, Time Warp Productions basically said, "Who's Mario? We've never heard of him." That takes some major guts.
Alright, first of all, if you really want to get technical, it's not the first. Miss Pac-Man could be considered a rip-off prior to its official release in 1981. It was essentially a mod of the original Pac-Man made by a few General Computer Corporation employees. I am going to let Plushy state the second point.
Second of all, while your footage does show at least 2 levels of the game, are one-for-one recreations of the first 2 levels of Mario Bros., correct me if I'm wrong, but the rest of your footage shows level design that I'm pretty sure isn't in said game ripping off. This includes the dinosaur thing flying around in that castle level.
We have nothing to say about the number 1 segment, so I think it's about time we move on to our final thoughts.
Well, my palms are sweaty, my knees are weak, and my arms are heavy. The foam is on my sweater already, mom's spaghetti. And it's all your fault, dude. The fact you really scratch out was a ripoff to put something on your list. Most of these games you call ripoffs are just really games in the same genre as games that are supposedly ripoffs. Oh, and not to mention how painful your lackluster research is. Well, I'm done, and I'm heading for the medicine cabinet.
I know that we aren't the only ones to cover this user, but when this single video of his is split almost 50-50 in terms of likes and dislikes in the tens of thousands, you can see how this commentary came into existence. You barely explained why the games are ripoffs, and when you do, you explain it poorly. I also noticed the lack of editing and comedy. I mean, the latter isn't necessarily needed, but it's extremely helpful in keeping an audience engaged, which isn't helped when we, and a big chunk of your comment section, find your voice annoying. Even if you ain't the best at comedy, making an attempt would help you stick out from the rest of the YouTubers that make you want to fall asleep halfway through. Overall, I do understand that this video was made a while ago, and he did somewhat improve, but I think he could do better. Even if your name is generic as all hell. That's it for me.
Yes, that leaves just me, huh? Alright, so where to begin? Let's start off with something I said earlier about how slow you speak. Like, geez. Not once in my life have I heard someone talk so damn slow. Even when you speak at a somewhat normal tempo, it honestly feels like so little is being said with so many words. Gotta reach that 10-minute mark to get them sweet revenues, am I right? And don't give me the excuse that you were feeling sick, because you sounded just the same here as you do in all your other videos. And while I'm at it, I'm disappointed on just how lazy this video is. The intro card is poorly animated, the end card is such sucky audio, and yes, I'm aware it's different now, but I could argue that the new end card is much more generic than the one in this video. And the rest of the countdown feels like it could have been made in Windows Movie Maker. This isn't helped by how utterly bland and generic you are. Like, you know it's bad when the people at Watch Mojo have more personality than you do. I acknowledge that you've made some improvements since this video, but honestly, other than a few minor things, not much has changed.
Plushy, are you okay?
Well, then it ain't any my concern. Now I must go. My people need me. Whee!
Well, Plushy, I'm gonna leave things to you. Goodbye. Whee!
7-Eleven was an inside job.